Hi, in the last part of making our RPG, we made a player that moves and animates, and enemies that move around the room and follow the player. In this video, we're gonna make it so when you touch an enemy, a turn-based battle begins, so it goes into a different room to start that battle. And from there, you can do attacks to hurt the enemy turn by turn, or you can leave the battle at any point. So let's open our project and get started. I divided this video into separate sections, and in the first section we're gonna design our battle screen, which will be its own room, and make a switching loop so you can touch an enemy to go into battle and then press the exit button to come back. In the project, if you open the sprites folder, you'll see a folder for turn-based sprites. These are the sprites we're gonna use in this video. There is a background for the battle screen, then a button for heavy attack, a button for light attack, and a button for running away from the battle. It's time to make the objects now. I'm gonna right click on the objects folder and create a new group. I'll call this battle, so this will have all the objects that we need for the battle. I'll go and make the first object in this folder. I'll call this obj battle switcher. I'm gonna use this object for switching from the game room into the battle room. So this object will carry information from the first room into the second room. Open the object and in the inspector, under its properties, enable the persistent option. We need this because by default, when you change the room, all the instances in the first room are destroyed. But we need this object's instance to carry over into the second room, and enabling the persistent option will allow us to do that. Then let's make another object in the battle folder. I'll call this obj battle manager. So this will be the object managing the battle loop and turns in the battle. Now it's time to make the buttons, but for them we need a parent object so we can give all of them the same code. I'll make an object called obj action parent. Then I'll go and make 3 more objects. First of all, obj action light for the light attack. Go and give it the sprite from the turn-based battle folder in the sprites. In the parent menu, set its parent to obj action parent. Then I'll duplicate this object with Ctrl D and call this obj action heavy for the heavy attack, and then double click on it to open it. I'll give it the sprite it needs. It already has the parent set because we duplicated it. I'll then duplicate this object again with Ctrl D and call this obj action run, which is for running away, and then double click on it to open it. I'll give it the sprite it needs in the inspector. We're gonna create our battle screen now. For this, let's go in the rooms folder, and here we're gonna make a new room asset. I'll name this rm_battle. Let's double click on it and open it. In the inspector, let's set the size of the room to 320 by 180, which is the size of our camera in the game. In the layers panel, open the background layer and set the sprite to the battle background from the turn-based folder. That's done, so let's open the instances layer and add some instances here. From the objects list in the assets, drag and drop obj battle manager into the room. Then drag the buttons one by one and place them wherever you want. You can disable the grid by clicking here, so you can place them wherever you want. I'll set them up this way, so it's the light attack first, then heavy, and then the run button. Okay, there was a lot of setup, but we can finally start coding now. The first thing we're gonna code is switching between the game room and the battle room. We're gonna start by coding what happens when the player touches an enemy. I'm gonna close the room tab and from the assets, open obj player. In the events list, let's go and add a collision event with obj enemy parent. This runs when the player touches any enemy instance. Here we just want to create an instance of the switcher object and give it the information it needs to carry into the battle room. The first thing we're gonna do is check if the switcher instance already exists. If it does, we're gonna exit the event so the rest of the code doesn't run and nothing happens. Now if it doesn't exist, let's go and create an instance of the switcher. I'll make it as 0 by 0. It doesn't matter because it's not a visual object, and I'll store its ID in a local variable. Then I'll set a few variables in the new instance. The first is a variable called player data, which is the player itself, so it will have all the variables that the player has. The second is the enemy data, that's the other instance that you're colliding with. So through that, we can access all the variables of the enemy that you just touched. Both of these are structs, which are just collections of variables. Then the final variable is the original room, which is the current room, so that at the end of the battle, we know which room we want to go back to. And now we're gonna call this function to change the room to the rm_battle room that we created. With this, we have covered going into the battle room, and now we're gonna program the action buttons so that we can press the run button to exit the battle room and come back to the original room. Let's first open obj action parent to program the base behavior for the action buttons. I'm gonna add the create event here, and in the event, I'm gonna make a function called action, and this will be an empty function for now. So using this syntax, you can create your own functions, and then you can call this function later like any other built-in function. We want to call this function when we click on this button, and right now it's empty because what the function does will be defined in a child object. For now, let's program the click. So in the events, go under mouse and select left pressed. Here we just want to call the action function that we created. Now we're gonna program the run button, so go into obj action run. You're gonna see the create event here from the parent, and we want to override it, so go into this menu and select override event. Here let's make the action function again, and this time the function is gonna have something inside it. It's simply gonna change the room to go back to the original room. So it's calling the room goto function, and then the room it's switching to is taken from the switcher object using the original_room variable. Remember, we set this variable before in the player, and now we are using it to go back. Now there's just one thing. When we create the switcher instance in the player, it's gonna go into the battle room, and then we come back with the exit button, but the switcher is gonna continue to exist forever. That means you can't go into the battle ever again. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna destroy the switcher instance when we come back into the original game room from a battle, but we're gonna do it 1 second after we have come back, so that gives the player a second to run away from the enemy, because during that second, the battle won't be triggered again. So in the assets, let's go into obj battle switcher. Here let's add an event. Under other, I'll add the room start event. This event runs whenever a new room has started. Let's add a condition to make sure that this is not the battle room, so it only triggers for game rooms. In that case, I'll set alarm 0 to 60. Let's add the alarm 0 event now. Here I'll simply destroy the instance. So when the switcher comes back into a game room, 1 second later, it will be destroyed. Now we can finally run the game and test this. Go near an enemy, touch it, and the battle begins. Click on the run button and you're back in the original room. The problem now is that the game room has restarted. It has forgotten where we were when the battle started. To fix that, go back into GameMaker and click on your game room, which for me is room 1. Go into the properties and enable the persistent option. This way it will remember where everything was when you leave the room and come back. So now in the game, if you start a battle and come back, you will be right where you were when the battle began. Let's take some time to take a breath now and move on to the next section. In this section, we are going to display the player and the enemy on the battle screen and give them health bars so their health properly appears on the screen. We need 2 more objects for this, which are the instances for where the player will stand and where the enemy will stand in the battle room. So I'll make a new object and name this obj battle player. I'll go into the inspector and give this the player sprite for when it's standing idle facing right. Then I'll make another object and name this obj battle enemy. I'll go in the inspector and give this the sprite for the NPC, because in the game this will just take the sprite of whichever enemy you're fighting, so the sprite you select here doesn't really matter. I'll open the RM battle room and place both of these objects. I'll put the player on the left and the enemy on the right, and then I'll close the room. Let's go into obj player and open the create event. Here I'm gonna make a few variables. We have HP, which is how much health the player has. Then we have HP total, which is how much total health the player can have. Then we have the amount of damage the player does to enemies. And then a charge variable, which will be used for the heavy attack. Now let's go into obj enemy parent. In the create event, let's make a variable for HP total. That's the total health of the enemy taken from its starting HP. Now we want to pull this information from these instances into their battle instances. So let's first go into obj battle player. Here I'm gonna add the create event. I'm gonna make a variable for the data of the player. It's just pulling the player data struct from the switcher so that it's faster to write. Then I'll go into the obj battle enemy object. I'm gonna add the create event here. Here also I'm gonna make a data variable, and this will pull the enemy data struct from the switcher. Then we're gonna set the sprite of this instance from the sprite in the data struct. So it's taking the sprite that the enemy had in the game room and applying it to the instance in the battle room. Now we have the data struct for both the player and the enemy, so we can read the health information from it and draw it on the screen. Let's do that for the enemy first because we are here already. I'm gonna go into the events and under draw add the main draw event. This is where you can draw anything in the room. Now when you add a draw event, the instance stops drawing itself. So to make sure it does draw itself, just call the draw_self function. And now we're gonna draw the health bar. Let's make some local variables for that first. The first one is the X position where the health bar will be drawn, then the Y position, then the width of the health bar, and then its height. The way we're gonna draw a health bar is by taking this SPR box sprite, which has 9 slicing enabled, so you can stretch it as much as you want and it will retain its corners. So we're gonna stretch it first to make the base of the bar, which is the total HP, and then stretch it again to draw how much health the player or the enemy currently has. For the base of the bar, let's call draw sprite stretched. We are drawing SPR box, its first frame, with the X, Y, width and height we created. Then we call another function, but this time the one that allows us to color it. This time we are drawing the second frame, so this will be 1. Then the X and the Y are the same. And then for the width, we are taking the width variable and multiplying it with the HP from the data divided by the total HP. Then we have the height, and then the color for this, which is red for the enemy, and then the opacity, which we'll keep at 1. Now we want to do this exact same thing in the player, just with a different color. So let's select all of this code and copy it with Ctrl+C. Then let's go into obj battle player. Here let's add the draw event. And in the event, I'm gonna paste the code with Ctrl+V. The only thing we'll change here is the color in this function call from C red to C green. Now run the game and go into battle. You'll see the correct sprite for the enemy here, and you can see the health bar for both the player and the enemy. We are now gonna work on allowing you to click on the light attack button and attacking the enemy, then allowing the enemy to attack you, and then make a loop out of that. We're gonna program the whole turn system now. So for that, go into obj battle manager. Here I'm gonna add the create events and set up a few variables. This variable will be 0 when it's the player's turn and 1 when it's the enemy's turn. This variable stores how much damage to do to the enemy during the player's turn after its attack animation is over. We are creating a function which will be called when the player wants to attack. It takes one parameter, which is how much damage this attack will do. In the function, we are storing that damage value in the damage to enemy variable. Then we are setting enemy turn to 1 because the player's turn is over. And then the animation should play for 40 frames, and after 40 frames, the attack should happen. So we will set alarm 0 to 40 frames. We're gonna make the animation later, so for now let's just add the alarm 0 event. Here I'll take the health of the enemy from its data struct and subtract the damage from its health. Then I'll set alarm 1 to 60 that's where the enemy attack will happen. So let's go and add that alarm 1 event. Here first of all, we're gonna calculate how much damage the enemy will do. This will be the damage of the enemy from its data struct multiplied with a random value between 0.7 and 1.2. So the damage the enemy does will vary a little every time it attacks. Then we take the health of the player from its data struct and subtract the damage from it. And now we set the enemy turn variable to 0 because the enemy has attacked and it's the player's turn again. The turn system is set up now, so we want to allow the player to click on the light attack button, which we'll call this function. We also want to disable the player's buttons if it's the enemy's turn. For that, let's go into obj action parent and here add the step event. Let's do a simple check. If it's the enemy's turn, then we'll set the alpha or opacity of the buttons to 0.2 so they appear a little transparent. Otherwise, if it's the player's turn, the alpha will be set back to 1 so they are fully visible. And in the left pressed event, we want to make sure to only allow the player to click the button if it is the player's turn. So let's add a line here to check if it is the enemy's turn, and in that case, we're gonna exit the event so nothing happens. What this means is that if it is the enemy's turn, you can't use the buttons. Now let's allow the player to click on the light attack button and do an attack. Open the obj action light object, and in the events, we want to override the create event from the parent like we did in the run object. And now let's add the action function here. This will call the player attack function from the manager object. If you remember, this function takes a parameter which is the amount of damage done to the enemy. For that, we're gonna take the damage from the player's data struct. That's it for the turns. Run the game and go into battle. You can now click on the light attack to attack, and the enemy's health goes down. Then the enemy does an attack and the player's health goes down, and then you can click on attack again and the loop goes on and on. Now even if you empty the enemy's health, nothing happens, and at this point the match should end, so let's work on that. Let's go into the obj battle manager object and open its create event. Here we're gonna make a new function called check for end. This is going to return true if the battle is over and false if it's not. For the return, we have a condition. It's checking if the enemy's health is at or below 0 or the player's health is at or below 0. Because you'll agree in either case the match is over and the function will return true. Now let's go into alarm 0. This is where the player attacks and then we set alarm 1 for the enemy's attack. I'm gonna remove this and make it be based on a condition. We're gonna check if the match has ended, and in that case, we're gonna set alarm 2. That's where we're gonna go back to the original room. Otherwise, we set alarm 1 as before so the enemy can continue to attack. Now let's open alarm 1 where the enemy attacks. After it has attacked, we're gonna do a check to see if the match has ended, and in that case, we're gonna set alarm 2. Now let's go into the events and add that alarm 2 event. Here we are simply gonna switch back to the original room just like we did in the run object. This will send us back into the original game room where we can do something based on the health of the player or the enemy. So for the player, let's go into obj player. Let's open the step event. Here let's do a simple check to see if the health is at or below 0, and if it is, we're gonna restart the game. For the enemy, let's go into obj enemy parent. Let's open the step event. Here we'll do a similar check to see if the health is at or below 0, and in that case, we'll destroy the enemy instance. That's it for that, so run the game, go into battle, fight the enemy and lower its health. When you've defeated it, you'll come back to the room and the enemy will have disappeared. So with this, our turn-based battles are entirely functional. You can now go and fight other enemies and defeat them, or be defeated yourself. What's remaining are the bells and whistles, like animating the player and the enemy and adding the heavy attack. So let's work on the animation first. The animations are gonna be pretty simple. The player will move forward and come back, and the enemy will also move a little and come back. Let's go into OBJ Battle Manager and open the create event. We're gonna edit the player attack function, which runs when the player wants to attack. Here we are simply gonna set an alarm in the player's battle instance. This alarm 0 will trigger the player's animation. For the enemy, let's go into alarm 0. In the condition where we set alarm 1 so the enemy can attack, we'll trigger the enemy's animation. This is setting an alarm in the enemy's battle instance. Let's work on the player's animation. For that, let's go into OBJ Battle Player. Let's go and add the alarm 0 event for the animation. This alarm will run every frame until the animation is finished. Here we're gonna increase the X position by 2 so it moves to the right. Then we check if it has moved 20 pixels to the right of its starting position, and in that case we set alarm 1 so it can move back. Otherwise we call alarm 0 again so it runs in the next frame. Let's add alarm 1 to move the player back to its original position. Here we're gonna reduce the X so it moves left. If the X is still greater than X start, meaning it's still to the right of where it started, we'll call alarm 1 again so it runs again in the next frame. Otherwise it won't be called and the animation will stop. So the animation here is set up, and now we want to do the exact same thing in the enemy but in the opposite direction. So let's open OBJ Battle Enemy and here add the alarm 0 event. Here we're gonna reduce the X by 2 so it moves to the left, and if it is 20 pixels to the left of X start, we'll set alarm 1 so it moves back. Otherwise we'll set alarm 0 again so it runs in the next frame. Let's add alarm 1 now to move it back. Here we'll increase X by 2, and if it's still to the left of where it started, we'll set alarm 1 again. Otherwise the alarm won't be called and the animation will stop. So that was a lot of simple code for making this animation. Let's run the game now and see where we are. Go into the battle and fight and you'll see the animations happening. It feels a lot better now because it's responsive and it's giving feedback to the player for pressing the buttons. We are in the final chapter of the video now and we'll enable the heavy attack. Remember the charge variable we made in the player? As you do more attacks, it will increase every turn, and when it reaches 1, you'll be able to do a heavy attack that does double the damage. For that, we want to draw the charge bar first. So let's go into the OBJ Battle Player object. In the draw event, at the end, we're gonna move the drawing position a little and then draw the charge bar. I'll move the Y by the height of the health bar and set the new height to 4 pixels. Then I'll draw the base for the charge bar, which is the same call we did for the health bar. And then I'll draw the colored part on top with the actual charge. So here everything will be the same, but for the width, I'll multiply it with the charge from the data struct, and then for the color, I'll set it to aqua. Now in the game, the charge will appear, but it will be empty. So we want it to increase every time the player attacks. For that, let's go into OBJ Battle Manager and open the alarm 0 event, which is where the player attacks. Here I'm gonna increase the charge from the player's data struct by 0.4. It's up to you how much you want it to charge every turn. I've chosen to go with 40%. Then to make sure it doesn't go above 1, I'll add that as a condition and reset the variable to 1 if it is above that number. Now we want to allow the player to do a heavy attack if this is at 1. So let's go into OBJ Action Heavy, and for the create event from the parent, let's override it as before. Let's make the action function, and in the function let's add a condition to make sure that the charge of the player is at or above 1. Only then we can do a heavy attack, and in that case we'll first reset the charge to 0 because you've just done a heavy attack and now the bar is depleted. Then let's call the player attack function. We'll use the same damage from the player's data struct as before, but this time we'll multiply it by 2 because this is the heavy attack and it should do double the damage. Now let's go into the step event and override this as well. We are doing this so we can make the button transparent if the charge is below 1 to tell the player that you can't click it. So let's add a condition to check if it's either the enemy's turn or the charge is below 1. In either case, we'll set the image alpha to 0.2, otherwise the alpha will be 1. So run the game and go into battle. The heavy button will be transparent and clicking on it will do nothing. Do some attacks and fill up the bar. You may have to go into a second battle if the first enemy is finished. And then you'll be able to click on the heavy button and it will do twice as much damage. And with that, our turn-based battle system is finished. You can now move on to the next part, which is about leveling up and stats. So I'll see you there.